This week, I want to tell you some stories and expand upon an interesting conversation that I had with a group of young professional women who are interested in building wealth. And they've heard that you can do it through buying small businesses. And so I met with them. We had a very honest conversation. And today, I'm going to run through that conversation and give you some of my insights on whether or not you really can invest passively in small businesses. So stay tuned. We're going to get into it today.
I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses while controlling risk. So if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it. Are you thinking of growing your business or beginning a journey into entrepreneurship? Take a shortcut to success by buying an existing and profitable business the right way. Visit businessbuyeradvantage.com and learn more about my online training, group coaching, and consulting services designed to help you win.
All right, everyone. So let me set the scene for you. Basically, someone reached out to me over LinkedIn. It was a young woman who's professional, and she said she had a group of other young women who were professionals that were interested in building their wealth. And so these were all very educated, high income people, people in the medical field, in law, like, earning good money. And they meet together and they have these conversations about ways that they can grow their wealth and how they can invest their money and further get ahead. And increasingly, they're seeing this messaging online about some of the stuff that we're very familiar with talking about over here. So the whole silver tsunami of retirements of baby boomers and, people excitedly talking about buying boring businesses and all that other kind of stuff that we hear all the time. And so they wanted to really know, is it possible to become passive investors in small businesses to create cash flow streams that will help grow their wealth while they continue to pursue their professional careers? Because again, these are not generally people who daydream about owning their own business. They're focused on their careers, they're earning good money, and they're interested in looking at ways that they can invest and go further. Now, I have had a couple of similar conversations with you guys about this over the last couple of years. So I'm going to share with you some other covers. So back in 2020, I made a video called Buy and Run a Small Business as a Side Hustle. And we're going to put a link to that here, floating around here somewhere, or in the description down below. And then I also had one that was in the summer of 2023 called Investing in Small Businesses While Keeping Your Job. And so both of those older videos are going to relate to some of the content and conversation that we're going to have today, but we're going to be looking at it from a little bit of a different angle today. So I just wanted to point those out to you. Now, here was the central question that they asked. It was basically, can I buy a small business without quitting my job and have it generate income like a rental property or a stock portfolio? So that was the big high level question. And for those of you in my audience who are business owners today, or who have experience working in a small business, you're probably like having a little bit of a chuckle or a smile or a laugh to yourself right now, because we hear this from time to time that somehow there's some sort of magic formula that will allow people to run something like a small business, and not ever have to check in or do anything, just magically get a check in the mail. And, people who get drawn into this idea from super hypey online content, they really just don't have the background or experience to understand why it doesn't make sense. And so this is what we're going to peel back today, is I'm going to go through it kind of step by step. So, when we have the typical person who is looking at buying a small business, the sort of normal client that we help here at my company with analyzing small businesses, we're usually looking at a person who is got two different hats on at the same time. They're usually wearing an investor hat and a job seeker hat, because a lot of the times these people are motivated by not wanting to continue whatever employment that they have, unlike what the women in the group were thinking. They wanted to keep their jobs. A lot of people want to leave their employment to go and do something on their own, but they don't want the risk of doing a startup. And so that's why they end up finding the world of business acquisition. So they fully intend to get into and run these businesses. And for the most part, people who sell these small businesses are themselves owner operators who are managing the day-to-day of the business to keep a close eye on everything. So, um, you know, true absentee ownership, like let's think about that for a minute. To actually not have to be there every day to know what's going on. I gave a few examples of some of the sort of misleading advertising or content that we sometimes see in this space. So, for example, it's an example I've given before, but I worked on a deal once where we looked at a transmission shop, and this was in the northern US. And the owner spent most of the year in Florida. And the business eventually went up for sale, and it was advertised as an absentee owned business because the owner was in Florida for most of the year. Now, it's true that the owner was not present on site at the business, but I don't think you could say that it was truly absentee owned. And here's why. That owner of the transmission shop ran it on site for 30 years. He knew the business inside and out. He understood all of the systems. He understood everything there is to do about that kind of business. And with the introduction of internet-based systems like a point of sale that you can log into from other places and digital video cameras in the shop and all kinds of stuff like that, from Florida, he was basically able to log into the POS system. He could see all of the bookings, all the jobs. He could see the revenue. He could see the sales. He could log into his video cameras. He could see what was going on in the shop. So from Florida, he could check in on the business whenever he wanted to. And when he had a conversation with his manager, because he was so well versed and such an expert in this business operation, he could have a very short conversation with that manager and really be filled in on everything that was going on in that business, right? Now, if you looked at the advertisement, it said absentee owned. So it would create the impression that anybody could buy the business and continue to run it in this fashion. But the reality is, if I bought the business, I don't know that much about the transmission business. I certainly would not have been able to keep an eye on that business the way that that owner did. And this is where the whole idea would kind of fall off the rails, because what you need to have if you're going to own a business and not work there is you need to actually have a completely different kind of skill set, which relates to supervision or oversight. This skill set that I mentioned before that I call the district manager skill set, for example. So if you think of a chain of similar businesses like gas stations, each one's going to have a manager, but there's probably some kind of regional manager who's overseeing what's happening in those different businesses day to day, week by week. And if there is a problem, they can come in and step in and help that manager get things on track. And this is the kind of skill set that is required. So, what other ways then are there to get this kind of functionality in place if you are not an expert in a given type of business or industry? If you don't have experience running that business, how do you do it? I have seen business buyers buy a business and successfully turn it into a business that they don't have to be there to manage. But the normal path for that is that they do buy the business, go there every day, learn the job of the manager, create systems, processes, decide what the KPIs are, and they build that all out so that then they can have someone else come in and take that day-to-day manager job. And in doing so, by experiencing the manager role, they understand what they need to be keeping an eye on, and that gives them the ability to develop the sort of district supervisor role, right? And the other key thing or problem with small businesses is the problem of what one of my clients calls bench depth. So what does he mean by that? Well, in a big company, you've got all of these different employees who can be trained to, learn each other's duties. And so if somebody's missing for a day, you can have other people fill in. But if you have a very small business, like if you have a business with only 7 employees and 5 of them, are customer facing, doing the work of delivering the product or service, and one of them is like the manager, and then there's another kind of support person of some kind. There are going to be things that that manager is doing that probably nobody else is ever going to have an opportunity to be cross-trained on. And so if that manager suddenly is no longer available, if they become ill, if they move away, whatever, then the only person often who can backfill that manager is the owner. And so this is another reason why direct experience and understanding of the management role is so key. And what I was explaining to these ladies is that the fact that a business is small is one of the aspects that makes it so risky. You could have a company start up and produce the very best soda that you could ever imagine, and everybody who tastes it really loves it. And that new business could be in one town, and everybody in that town could decide to only drink the soda from this new company. Now, will that affect Coca-Cola? Yeah, they will lose sales in that town, but overall, they'll be fine because they do so much business in so many different places. And I draw the comparison between that example and like a little microbrewery. So if you are a little microbrewery with a dozen employees and you make some beer and you're doing well in your town, and then another microbrewery opens up across the street from you, because all of your sort of market activity, your entire economic footprint is in that one space, you are much more susceptible to threats that directly impact the space that you're in, right? And so everything about these small businesses is higher risk. You've got the limited number of employees, the limited redundancy in your workforce. You've got the greater exposure to more localized markets, what's happening in that town. You don't even need to have somebody open up across the street. All you need to have happen, for example, is have the major employer close down and all of a sudden people are on unemployment and they just don't have as much money to spend. Your microbrewery is going to really face that as a huge problem in that town because you are tied to that one specific local market. So these were just some of the risk things that I was bringing up to demonstrate why these businesses sell for what appears to be a relatively low, price if you look at the cash flow multiples. So if you now that we understand, like it's not really a feasible thing to actually have this sort of passive investment, passive ownership, how then can you get that function without you having to do it? There's a couple of ways. So, for example, you could partner with someone, and that partner could be the operator, right? So now what you're talking about is you're talking about being an investor into the business deal with a partner. Here's the problem with that. I have seen a tremendous number of deals where someone with money finds somebody who has an interest in operating a business. They create some kind of partnership, but because the operator themselves doesn't have much put into it with respect to skin in the game, they aren't investing a bunch of money. They don't have the same kind of impetus to succeed and the same kinds of motivations. And furthermore, if you were going to take on debt from outside of the investment, often, in fact, the SBA rules were just changed to include this, the investor also needs to be a guarantor or have their name on that loan. And so what it means is that you've got one person with a bunch of money and one person without money, and they both guaranteed a bank loan. If something goes wrong in that business, who do you think the bank is going to sue if the business can't make the payments, right? They're going to go after the person with the money. So it's not just a matter of finding an operating partner who has a willingness to do the work and be in there every day and run the business. You actually need to find partners who also have something to lose, right? And who have maybe background, experience, et cetera, in that industry, so that that they're going to do whatever it takes to succeed, and they have some kind of background or experience that's going to lend them to be more successful in that operation. And so, that's one way you could do it. If you want to just, step back and really hire someone to manage it for you, and you say, I'm going to learn this oversight stuff on my own, then one of the other suggestions I came up with is to choose an industry for which there is a readily available pipeline of talent. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, a hotel. If you owned a hotel, there are colleges that actually have certificate programs in hotel management, right? So there's this constant pipeline of people learning the skills of this trade on how to manage a hotel. And you're going to find that similarly in other kinds of industries too, where you've got people that are learning how to run these businesses in a formal way, or because there's such a huge number of businesses. So, for example, little restaurants, right? There's such a huge number of little restaurants that if you put up an advertisement looking for someone with experience in managing a little restaurant, you're going to find a bunch of people who have experience in doing this kind of stuff. And that labor pool means that you've got the ability to try to do this with an employee. It can create risks. I recently, just last year, helped somebody who owned a retail store and about 15 years ago opened a second location about an hour's drive away. And they found the perfect person to run it for them. And that person, after over a decade, gave notice that they were going to leave to go do something else. And they tried to find someone else to be the person to take over. And they were not successful at all. It was a pretty small town. They didn't get anyone that gave them any degree of confidence as far as the applicants. And so in the end, they decided to sell the business because they realized that without that sort of unicorn key management person, they were really going to struggle with trying to keep that business going, and they didn't want the challenge. So, their option was to simply sell it. There are other ways to invest in these small businesses without owning them. So my very first book back in 2014 was called Invest Local. It's all about this kind of stuff. And I pointed out to the people in the group, I said, banks invest in small businesses all the time, but they don't own any of them, right? And so are there other ways to do this? Yeah, there are. So like I describe in the book Invest Local, you can do capital leases on equipment, you can do secured loans, you can create different kinds of structured note investments where somebody else owns the business. They're the ones in there working every day to make it successful, but they have some kind of need for capital, and you provide that capital and work out a deal with them. That could be very structured, like a bank loan, where you're simply getting a certain payment every month. And so you're going to be looking for an above average rate of return on that because of the riskiness of the exposure to small business. And the reason that that person wants to do the deal with you is because maybe they can't get the money from a bank, or they don't want to deal with banks. And people who have experience in small business can often, sympathize with that sort of sentiment. So there are other ways to do this. There's other ways to expose yourself to the small business sector without necessarily being the owner. And that could present some opportunities, because if you make a loan to a small business and you're not an owner, then you would never be expected, for example, to put your name on other loans or guarantee loans or anything like that. You can truly limit your exposure to the amount of your investment, especially if there's other leverage at play. One of the people in the group brought up the question of franchises. So, franchises are interesting because they've got very structured operational models, and there's usually already been a series of KPIs identified within that business. What are the key things that need to be looked after? And so we talked about it for a little while, and I pointed out that one of the things that I strongly believe is that if you like a franchise, if you think that a franchise is a great way for you to get into business, that there is a very big difference between buying an existing location versus starting one from scratch. And it was interesting because some of the people in the group didn't really get that. And we talk about these things all the time on this channel. I've been going for 11 years now. When you have someone who's new to the space, they come into it, they have not had the time to kind of sit and think or absorb conversations. And one of the people in the group was like, kind of had a revelation when I said, if you start a brand new franchise, you are still opening a new business, which has no customers. You still face all the same risks of doing an independent startup business, except you've got maybe a little bit more in the way of guidance in understanding how to operate the business, because you've got that backup and support from the franchise organization and their operating model and manuals and all that kind of stuff. But it's still a new business. And so I pointed out that buying an existing location might make more sense, which reminds me, franchise warnings came out in 2016. I've just done an update. So the paperback, Kindle, and PDF versions of this book have just been updated for 2025. It's about 30% longer than it used to be. Audiobook update is going to take a little bit longer to do, but franchisewarnings.com is where you can find the PDF, or head to Amazon for that book. I've added a bunch more content from my experiences over the last decade in helping people through the consulting business that I do today. What about real estate? So one of the people in the group said, can you kind of compare this to real estate? Like, I could buy a building or I could buy a small business. What makes more sense? And so we talked about real estate. And we talked about just how huge it is, right? There's just so many buildings everywhere. And there is also an industry for taking care of those buildings. So if you bought a building, an apartment building, for example, and you didn't want to take care of it and collect the rent and find the tenants and all that kind of stuff, you could hire a property management company. And if that property management company did a poor job, there are always other property management companies. And I kind of showed how the ecosystem in real estate had been kind of developed and has evolved to be more readily, to make it more readily accessible to the passive investor, right? And then, someone pointed out like the difference in pricing. And so in real estate, we use cap rates to value buildings. So if a building has a net operating income of $50,000 a year and you need a 5%, cap rate to justify your investment, then that building would be worth $1 million, because if you paid $1 million for it, it generates 50,000 of net operating income. This is, the money that you're getting, your 5% rate of return. Now, here's the thing is that, obviously you're going to leverage that to some degree, and a lot of that net operating income is going to go to service debt. People erroneously, and if you take the cap rate of 5% and you flip it over its head and say, what multiple of cash flow is this? You end up with 20x, right? So $1 million is 20 times 50,000. So a 5% cap rate is like a 20x multiple of net operating income in real estate. And what people will do is they'll compare that multiple of the net operating income, and then they'll look at small businesses and say, wow, small businesses sell for 2.4 or 2.5 times SDE. Small businesses are 1/10 the price. But it's not true, because seller's discretionary earnings is not the same as net operating income. Net operating income is supposed to be this cash flow after all the expenses have been paid, including management. And SDE is not that at all. SDE is the amount of money available at the discretion of an owner operator that works full time. So in addition to, making the capital investment in buying the business, like you might buy a building, the small business investor is also investing their full-time effort to get that seller's discretionary earnings. And so it's a totally apples and oranges comparison. And this is why, even though you buy a small business at 2.5 times SDE, depending on how you finance it, you might still end up taking 7 or 10 years to pay for it, right? Because it's not the same. A more accurate way to look at it would be to maybe look at it normalized EBITDA, for example, that where you've got the fair market value of the owner's wage built into your expenses, and you're looking at the true cash flow afterwards. There's a reason why smaller businesses, we look at SDE versus normalized EBITDA. And that is because, getting back to the beginning of this conversation, that is because most people that buy these small, local, boring businesses are people that have both the investor and job seeker hat on at the same time. What they want to know is, if I buy this business and run it, how much money do I get? And they're making their decision not strictly in terms of return on investment, return on equity, or any of those kinds of calculations. They're making their decision based upon, will I enjoy doing this? Do I think this is going to be better for me and my family than what I'm doing right now? Do I think it's going to deliver a better lifestyle? Do I think I'm going to be happier? Right. And so these are like metrics that fall off the Excel spreadsheet. And largely, these are the things that people look at when they're looking at buying a small, boring business, if you want to frame it that way. And that is the majority of the deals, right? And so just to wrap things up at the very end, I said to everyone there in the call that if they were serious about, investing in a small business, you need to do the regular stuff that we talk about. You need to build the right team, get the right advisors, all that kind of stuff. But you really need to make sure that you understand what you're getting into, and the scale of the business is going to be really important. So if you're buying a business with millions of dollars of revenue that already has, a leadership team in place, and there's somebody there who's like the second in command who could potentially step up into the top slot, then that might be a more plausible target for someone who wants to have a more passive role, but you still have the bench depth problem. So getting back to my client who uses this term, he buys businesses where there's a number two that is a parent who can step up and take the primary role so that he doesn't have to run the businesses himself. But he runs several of the same kind of business. And he's got other people in his staff and other operators at other locations, all of whom act together kind of like in a systematic fashion, so that if any one location leader were to leave, there is this capacity to be able to manage that shortfall in the short term before they can find someone to replace permanently that leadership capacity. And so as businesses change and as they grow, they develop the ability to de-risk these kinds of things because they have these additional capacities or bandwidths within the organization. So a business that a bigger company could buy and make into a passive investment with an operator, that opportunity would not necessarily be the same for an individual buying one business who wants to turn it into a passive operation with a manager, right? And so I hope that helps. I thought it was a really interesting conversation. There were lots of very good questions that came out of it. And at the end of the day, what my advice is typically for people that are looking at these small Main Street businesses is always, if you're going to buy one, you're probably going to be making an investment that represents one of the biggest assets of your entire financial portfolio or ownership portfolio. And so would you entrust a huge investment, maybe of millions of dollars, to a stranger while you go to work someplace else? Like, for most people, that wouldn't make sense. If they're going to make a huge investment, they want to be there. And if you're going to be there, what makes sense? Obviously, buy something that will take advantage of your individual skills and your talents so that you can really do a lot of work to improve the value of that business and to make it great. And that way you buy a business that is profitable, you pay a fair price for it, but you improve it given your own skills and talents. And that's where you get the real lift in value, by making it better based on the skills that you already have and what you can bring to the table. And if you look at yourself and you're like, I don't think I have any skills, I don't think I have any talents, work on those in the world of employment. Get yourself a better job, get yourself an opportunity for leadership, learn how to manage other people, learn new skills, develop yourself so that you become the asset that is going to enhance the value of whatever business it is that you end up buying. And with that, I'll say thank you very much. Don't forget, if you are interested in buying a business, you should definitely be heading over to businessbuyeradvantage.com. Sign up for the online training there. It's going to take you through all the basics into even more advanced topics. It's evolved over the course of the years. It's like 40 or 45 hours of stuff now. Recently had someone tell me that it took them over a week to get through everything, and I believe them. But that's where you're going to learn how to do it. And my promise is that you're going to learn how to buy a business in a risk-reduced way. You're going to have a better understanding of what can go wrong and how you can manage risks through the structure of your deal. So that's over at businessbuyeradvantage.com. And I'll thank you very much. And with that, I'll say see you later. Cheers.
So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I've prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.